and welcome to Sawyer Studios. Today we'll be discussing one of the most prolific pieces ever written, one driven to the point of existential crises. It answers the eternal question, is life vanity? This piece, of course, being Mahler's Second Symphony, nicknamed Resurrection. Now Mahler himself grew up Jewish, not believing in the post-arrived Messiah, the Christ, who raises all after he himself is raised. However, Mahler underwent a conversion, whether it was initially genuine in its repentful act, or merely an anti-Semitic pressure of cultural norm. You may never know. But I do believe that this piece gives direct insight on where Mahler eventually landed in his proverbial encounter with the Almighty. Although Mahler was not an author of literature, he was an author of music. And in this piece, in his Second Symphony, Mahler writes to us, I believe, his testimony. In order to fully understand what Mahler is saying, we are going to use two forms of analysis used in literature: Syntagmatic Analysis and Paradigmatic Analysis. You might be asking, how does one use a form of analysis used in writing and apply it to music? Well, let's start with syntagmatic analysis, which is analysis by syntax. And to do this, we will need the assistance of the incomparable Leonard Bernstein, who gave 6 phenomenal Harvard lectures in regards to music. The second lecture in his series is about musical syntax, in which I will link all 6 lectures in the description below. I highly suggest you at least give the second lecture a listen, because I'm only going to be summarizing his main amazing groundbreaking points. His overall premise was that syntax is the study of actual structures of basic sounds into words and words into phrases, or words into sentences, more or less. If we translate that definition to music, then syntax is now the structure of notes into motives, and motives into phrases. Taking a motive and breaking it down into its elemental meaning would be the equivalent of parsing, as it were. If you were to parse out a sentence, for example, Bernstein uses this sentence in his second lecture: "Isn't Jill loved by Jack?" Now, if we break this down to its true simplistic form, we remove the transformations of negation, so it goes to, is Jill loved by Jack? And then we remove the interrogative transformation to, Jill is loved by Jack, and then take out the passive transformation to, Jack loves Jill. And then breaking it down even further to a subject of the transitive verb Jack, love, and then the object, which is Jill, going from the big picture to isn't Jill loved by Jack to the origin of Jack love Jill. If you are well versed in musical analysis, you might be thinking to yourself right now, syntagmatic analysis in music sounds a lot like Scherzos analysis. And you'd be right. Scherzos analysis takes a chunk of music, the whole, and breaks it down to its most simplistic form. To give you an example from Mahler 2, let's move to the piano. Now we'll play for you a little bit of what the resurrection theme is. In the piece, there is a lot of stuff happening in the background, such as the cello and bass, that this entire thing is going. And then they switch to. And then we have long held out notes in the winds, creating these lovely harmonies of C major to A minor, add in a G, which is the dominant, back to C. If we were to think about the two chords that are the most elemental to music, we would think tonic, dominant, tonic. And the only thing different here is that we've added deceptive cadence. Only one note moved above. And so in reality, all this humbo jumbo in the cello, broken down harmonically, we have simple chords of 1, 6, 1, 6, 1, 5, 1, 6, 1, 6, 1, 5, 1. What about the melody though? Start with a perfect fifth. Repeat it again. And then a simple scale going up to the fifth. And then again. Lead and tone. Using all of the notes in the C major scale. C major, of course, being do, or a fixed do in Europe. If we were to do a Scherzos analysis, then it would just be perfect fifths. And one could argue that if you were to break down this entire melodic material here, this whole is really just just a little ornamented, and just an ornamentation again. This entire section is based on the perfect fifth, going back from chords of 1, 6, 1, 5, 1. And that is what we break this down to. What about paradigmatic analysis? Well, I think we should ask ourselves first, what is a paradigm? And by definition, it is a set of forms having a common root or stem, of which one form must be selected in certain grammatical environments. You might ask yourself, what's a form? Form is a meaningful unit of speech, such as a morpheme, morpheme being me, or ma, or ku, or ha. Word, or a sentence, called also a speech form. If we were to go back to Leonard Bernstein's Harvard lecture, he gives a brief analogy, which he admits is incomplete and also is not completely sure of it himself, of morpheme equals emotive, word equals phrase, sentence equals movement. Later we go from word equals note in the lecture, but you'll see how he gets there. In general, if we were to apply those derivatives to the definition of paradigm, we would get a musical definition, which would be a set of motives, phrases, or movements having a common root or stem, of which one must be selected in certain musical environments. And so a paradigmatic analysis is the analysis of motives or phrases that have a common root or stem found in particular music environments. And what I've done is I've done a paradigmatic analysis of the finale of Mahler 2, which, since syntagmatic analysis was taking the surface structure and bringing it to the deep structure, Scherzos analysis, which is taking something whole, breaking it down to its elemental roots, so there's practically nothing left, arguably. Paradigmatic analysis is looking at it as the whole, looking at the forest more so than the trees, if you will. And so in my paradigmatic analysis, we've broken this finale up into many units, color-coded by their different themes or what they're trying to communicate. I think with a mixture of both syntagmatic analysis and paradigmatic analysis, we are going to be able to finally figure out what Mahler is trying to tell us in this somewhat prophetic piece of music. Let's go back to the piano, shall we? If we were to go through the music of the finale of Mahler 2, you'd find many different themes and motives, which in our case, a motive being potentially a word or even a phrase, a clause even, we can depict and start to decipher what Mahler's trying to communicate to us. The first one is colored orange, Unit 1, which unfortunately in this piece really only makes itself prevalent at the very beginning. And why is that? It's probably because this is the death motive. Just a C major scale, viciously played, very fast, in the low, cello, and bassi. This motive is seen throughout predominantly in the first 4 movements many a time. And that is why it is not shown a lot in the finale, because we're no longer talking about death. Mahler is done discussing the outlook of death final. He is now looking past death. For it's suitable that the finale starts with a death motive, but the rest of it is about life after. Next is Unit 2, which I like to call the judgment motive. And why do I call it that? It's because there is this massive trumpet call. And whenever we have these eerie trumpet calls, whether it's mixed with this B minor chord with a C pedal, that is judgment if I ever heard it. There are also moments in this piece where the trumpet call sounds distant almost. Very placid. But nonetheless, Unit 2 represents judgment is coming, and judgment always comes after death, which makes sense for it to be right after the death motive. Next is the resurrection theme, which I won't play for you again, but you just heard before, colored in dark blue. Because after judgment, there's resurrection for all, as we know. Paul writes in his letter to the Corinthians. But just because there's resurrection for all does not mean we all will share the same eternity, the same fate. And after the resurrection theme, the judgment motive comes back to horns in F. Perfect fifth again. That one must be softer than the first because it's an echo. And if we take out that pesky F, it's really just 2 perfect fifths. But why the F? Well, if we continue with our harmonic series, the next interval is the perfect fourth. And so even so, Mahler is still not breaking away from this fundamental place of where music originated. Frequencies and science, where it's found naturally in nature, starting with the perfect fifths and adding in fourths. Unit 5, we have a new motive. It's the rest motive, and for rest, it starts off a little uneasy in the oboe. But then the horns come back with their classic melody. Once again, all perfect fifths and perfect fourths. And what was an eerie triplets that began in the oboe turned into not so eeriness in the 2 harps. Same triplet feel though, which is why they are connected. Suddenly we've gone out of C Phrygian and we've entered into the realm of C major again. Unit 6 begins the red section, which is the resurrection hymn. I'll play a little bit for you from the trombones. Fritz now. Then in Unit 8, purple again, but we go back to not the eeriness triplets of the oboe, but to the full F major, which, curiously enough, the key signature still remains in C Phrygian. But we are now in glorious F major, and the horns come in with that beautiful melody. Continuing on in perfect fourths and perfect fifths, the natural harmonic series built upon the horns. Moving on through Unit 8, we have this beautiful rest motive. We continue on to the next unit, which is 10, which is theme of faith and affirmation. We start with the tremolo in the second violin. We have flute and English horn. Bringing us to Unit 11, which is a rendition of the Resurrection Hymn. Moving to Unit 12, which is another one with more brass, fuller and fuller, leading to, once again, the rest motive. Bum, 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 beam, bum, bum. Now we have this middle section. Vision of the Apocalypse, which is a new color. Which this section is brass, and I'm not even going to attempt to play this on the piano, so I'll let you listen to this for a little bit. And in this section, we get a character change, moving to what I like to call March of the Dead, which is head off with this theme and the violins. And that brings us off into a glorious march, leading us all the way through this middle section, over and over, going back to the Vision of the Apocalypse themes, with once again motives from the Resurrection Hymn and theme sparsed throughout, getting to Unit 20, which feels like a mixture almost, has the same feel of the Vision of the Apocalypse, but it feels like judgment nonetheless. Almost as if it seems like the Judgment Unit 26 is what sort of brings us back to the beginning. We even have the repeat in the horns, except this time it's a half step up. F sharp to C sharp now. After all that time, Mahler has taken us a single half step. Finally, we get to the only new color in this section, which is this cyan, which I have titled Judgment Fulfilled. This is no longer intimidating judgment. What Bernstein would probably use in his syntactic musical analysis, that if this theme, this judgment theme, if that is judgment that is harsh and intimidating, then this, being the harmonic difference, the contextual difference, which would be the verbs, harmonic being adjectives, we now have peaceful judgment. Finally, we reach the coda, and before the coda, though, we do have words in the choir that have begun. Alas, Mahler allows us to cheat a little bit in our storytelling, for he himself wrote these lyrics to the piece, not getting them from any other person or source. And this is why I do believe in affirming that Mahler did find some sort of reality and genuine faith in Catholicism when he converted, or at least at the time when he wrote this piece. Because who could write such lyrics but a man who is encapsulated by the love of God himself? And so looking at Mahler's story through this finale, this wonderful theatrics, we have the overarching view his motives, which tell the story of death at the beginning, which is reflected in movements 1, 2, 3, and then right after death, judgment calls in the trumpet's horn. Judgment that is unsure because unsure of what happens after death. We just hear judgment. Then after that, a beautiful resurrection theme noted in the C major versus C Phrygian, going all the way back to the horn call the judgment once again, to the rest motive, which is played in triplets, moved throughout, morphing into a resurrection hymn. Hymns, of course, being sung by choirs. No doubt Mahler was thinking about the angelic choirs in heaven that would sing as we enter through those pearly golden gates. And then a theme of faith and affirmation, faith being faith that got him there, affirmation from God, affirming that there is life after death. A bit of a relapse of anxiety, end of the world, of maybe even prophetic musical nuances that express the coming apocalypse and the end of the age. March of the Dead, how everyone will rise, everyone will be resurrected, but perhaps to a fate that is eternally damning or of pure joy. Going then all the way back to judgment once again, then to resurrection, and going to rest, to a resurrection hymn, faith and affirmation once again, finally going to judgment fulfilled, finishing with words reaffirming what we believe Mahler to be saying in the first 20 or so minutes of this piece, being affirmed in his Germanic words that have reached the hearts of many throughout the ages.